Welcome, everyone, to Easy History Podcast. Today, we're going on a deep dive into a history that's, well, let's just say it's full of drama, intrigue, and some pretty incredible art. The history of Italy.
Yeah.
Now, you might think of pizza and pasta when you think of Italy, but this peninsula has seen empires rise and fall, revolutions, and cultural shifts that still echo today.
What I find really captivating about Italian history is this constant back and forth, this swinging between being a global center of power and influence and then falling back into a more fragmented state.
It's almost like a pendulum swinging back and forth.
Exactly, like a pendulum swinging between holding the reins of the world and then struggling to even unify its own regions.
Okay, so we're talking about a place that goes from Roman emperors to these city-states that are constantly fighting each other. Where does this roller coaster ride even begin?
Well, we have to go way back in time, back to the Bronze Age, around the 12th to 10th centuries BC.
Wow, that's really going back?
Yeah, this is when we first start to see what we might recognize as Italy today. Not a unified country yet, but a collection of distinct regional cultures sharing some common threads like language, beliefs, and ways of life.
Almost like a mosaic, those little pieces coming together.
Exactly, a mosaic coming together piece by piece over centuries.
Wow, so not a single origin story, but these cultures mixing and mingling over centuries. That must make tracing their development pretty complex.
It does, but then we get to the Iron Age, around the 9th century BC. This is where things get even more interesting. We see the rise of the Villanovan culture.
The Villanovans.
Yeah, and these weren't your typical farmers. They were building urban centers, crafting really intricate metalwork, and even had organized burial practices.
Wait, hold on. Organized burial practices. That sounds like they were pretty advanced for their time. What do we know about these burial practices?
Well, their burial sites, especially in Villanova, which is near Bologna, reveal a lot about their beliefs and social structures. They placed a high value on craftsmanship, and their metalwork, as I said, was surprisingly sophisticated for the time. They even had early forms of urban planning.
Urban planning. So this suggests a level of social organization that goes beyond simple villages. So they were setting the stage for these city-states that would later become so important in Italian history. They were already thinking about urban living and community organization back then.
Exactly. And while the Villanovans were establishing themselves up north, another fascinating group was emerging in central and southern Italy. The Etruscans, they hit their peak between the 7th and 6th centuries BC.
The Etruscans, now those are the ones with the stunning tombs filled with all the art and treasures, right?
Got it. They were masters of art, engineering, and trade.
And their language is still a bit of a mystery, isn't it?
It is. Even today, scholars are still trying to fully decode the Etruscan language, which gives us just these tantalizing glimpses into their beliefs and daily life.
It's like they left behind this incredible puzzle for us to solve. So we have the Villanovans up north, the mysterious Etruscans down south. Was there anyone else in the mix at this point?
Oh, absolutely. Around the 5th and 4th centuries BC, you have Celtic tribes migrating from Gaul and settling in the Po Valley.
That's modern-day France for those listening.
Exactly, and they brought their own distinct cultures and traditions to the Italian peninsula, adding yet another layer to this already complex mix.
Wow, so even before Rome takes center stage, Italy is already this melting pot of cultures.
It is, and don't forget the Greeks. From the 8th century BC onwards, they established colonies in southern Italy and Sicily, bringing with them their own ideas about philosophy, art, and democracy.
Oh, the Greeks. I mean, their influence is everywhere.
It was enormous, and they really laid the groundwork for many aspects of Western civilization. Think about it. We have the Villanovans, the Etruscans, the Celts, and the Greeks, all interacting and influencing each other. It's really quite mind-boggling.
It really is. It's like this giant historical laboratory, and all these different cultures are mixing and ultimately shaping what Italy would later become.
Precisely, and out of this incredible mix emerges one of history's most influential empires, Rome. It's a story that begins with the legendary founding of Rome, traditionally dated to 754-753 BC.
Okay, here's where things get really epic, right? Because we have this small city-state that somehow becomes the dominant power in the Western world.
Yeah.
How did that happen? What were the key ingredients in this Roman recipe for success?
Well, early Rome wasn't all that different from the other city-states popping up across Italy, but they had a few things going for them. Firstly, their location on the Tiber River was strategic, right? It gave them access to trade routes and fertile land. Secondly, they were masters of adopting and incorporating elements from other cultures.
Kind of like picking and choosing what works.
Exactly. Remember the Etruscans? The Romans borrowed heavily from them, especially when it came to religious practices, engineering, and even in their alphabet.
So they were open to new ideas, willing to learn from their neighbors. That's a pretty smart strategy.
It was, and they weren't afraid to fight for what they wanted either. By the 4th to 3rd centuries BC, Rome had established its dominance over the Italian peninsula through a combination of military might, strategic alliances, and clever political maneuvering.
So they weren't just conquering, they were forging relationships and integrating the people they conquered into their system.
That's right.
And then come the famous conquest beyond Italy's borders. I mean, names like Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, these guys were practically rock stars of their day.
They were larger-than-life figures who shaped the course of history. But their ambition, it brought about significant changes within Rome itself.
Oh, I bet. What kind of changes?
Well, the 1st century BC was a period of really intense political turmoil. You had powerful generals like Marius, Sulla, then Caesar, all vying for control. The old Roman Republic was crumbling under the weight of its own success, and this paved the way for the rise of the Roman Empire under Augustus in 27 BC.
Okay, so Rome goes from a republic to an empire. What does that mean for Italy? It's now the heart of this vast, powerful energy, right?
Exactly. For 3 centuries, Italy experiences its first real peak of global influence. It becomes the center of political power, economic activity, and cultural innovation. Think about the legacy of Roman law, engineering, literature, and art. It's all rooted in this period. They roads, aqueducts, and monumental architecture that you can still see today. Their legal system influenced countless societies, and their literature, it's still studied and admired today.
3 centuries at the top, that's quite a run. But I guess all good things, eventually, must come to an end.
They do, and for Italy, the beginning at the end starts with a seemingly simple decision. Emperor Constantine decides to move the capital of the empire to Constantinople.
That's modern-day Istanbul, right?
Yes, around 330 AD, and this shifts the center of gravity away from Rome, leaving Italy increasingly vulnerable.
Here's where I imagine things start to get interesting, and maybe a little messy. What happens to Italy when Rome's grip on power starts to loosen?
Well, as the Western Roman Empire weakens, a new threat emerged from the north, these barbarian invasions. Waves of Goths, Vandals, and other groups sweep across Europe, and Italy, no longer the fortified heart of the empire, is unable to resist.
So it's like a domino effect. One event leads to another, and Italy gets caught in the middle of this massive upheaval.
Precisely. And this leads us to one of the most significant events in Western history, the fall of Rome. In 476 AD, the barbarian king Odoacer deposes the last Roman emperor in the West, Romulus Augustulus. This is traditionally considered the end of the Western Roman Empire and the beginning of a new era for Italy, the medieval period.
Okay, so Rome falls and Italy enters the Middle Ages, but does that mean everything just collapses? Is it all just chaos and decline?
That's a common misconception. The medieval period is often portrayed as a dark age, but it's actually a time of fascinating transformations. Yes, there's a decline in urban life, trade networks are disrupted, and Italy's no longer the center of a vast empire. But out of this fragmentation emerges a new kind of complexity. New powers rise, new ideas take root, and the foundations are laid for the Italy we know today.
So it's not an ending, but a beginning, like closing one chapter and opening another one, full of new characters and challenges.
Exactly, and one of the key players in this new chapter is the Catholic Church. While political structures are crumbling, the Church provides a sense of continuity and stability. It becomes a unifying force, holding on to Roman traditions and spreading its influence across the peninsula.
So amidst all the chaos, the Church is a source of order and a link to the past.
Right, and this is particularly evident during the rule of the Ostrogoth king Theodoric, who ruled from 489 to 526 AD. He manages to blend this barbarian political and military power with Roman administrative traditions. It wasn't just about conquest for him. It was about finding ways to govern and maintain order in this new landscape.
Theodoric, that's a name you don't hear every day. He sounds like a pretty shrewd operator, someone able to navigate these complex cultural dynamics.
He was. He even commissioned some impressive building projects in Ravenna, showcasing the continued influence of Roman architectural styles. But then things get even more complicated when the Byzantines, who were the Eastern Roman Empire, tried to reclaim Italy.
Wait, so we have the Western Roman Empire gone, the Ostrogoths in control, and now the Byzantines are trying to take back Italy. It's getting crowded on the peninsula.
It certainly is. And this Byzantine attempt, though ultimately unsuccessful, it further fragments the peninsula. Italy's now divided between areas controlled by various barbarian groups and those under Byzantine rule. And this sets the stage for even more power struggles and cultural mixing in the centuries to come. When we last left off, Italy was a bit of a jigsaw puzzle. You had barbarian kingdoms, Byzantine territories, and the looming presence of the church all vying for control.
Yeah, it wasn't just about military power, it was about shaping the culture and the very identity of the peninsula.
Exactly. And in the late 6th century AD, a new group enters the scene, the Lombards.
The Lombards. Okay, I'll admit I don't know a lot about them. Fill me in. Who were the Lombards?
Well, they were a Germanic people, and like many of the other barbarian groups, they weren't just interested in raiding and pillaging. They wanted to settle down, establish their own kingdoms. They had a strong warrior culture, but also a knack for adapting to local conditions. Over time, they intermingled with the existing Roman population, adopting aspects of Roman law and administration.
So another layer added to this Italian tapestry. But while the Lombards are setting up shop in the north, what's happening elsewhere in Italy?
Well, down south, things are about to get interesting. Remember those Byzantines trying to hold on to their territories?
Yeah.
They face a new challenge in the 9th century when Arab forces conquer Sicily.
Ah, Sicily, that strategically important island in the Mediterranean. What sort of impact did the Arabs have on the region?
It was huge, and it lasted for centuries. They introduced new agricultural techniques like irrigation systems, new crops were brought in like citrus fruits and sugarcane, and they also brought their knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, which really enriched the cultural landscape. And of course, their architectural style left a lasting mark on Sicily with those beautiful mosques and palaces.
So it wasn't just military conquest, it was a clash, but also a fusion of cultures. It seems like Italy is constantly absorbing and adapting to these outside influences.
You're absolutely right. And it doesn't stop there. In the 8th century, we see the rise of another major player, the Frankish king Charlemagne.
Charlemagne, now that's a name that echoes through history.
He conquers the Lombards in 774 AD, and he is later crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 800 AD, incorporating much of Italy into this vast empire that he creates.
Yeah. Charlemagne is considered one of the fathers of Europe, right?
He is a pivotal figure, that's for sure. Trying to unify much of Western Europe under his rule, he promoted education, a revival of classical learning. He laid the groundwork for what would later be called the Carolingian Renaissance, but his control over Italy wasn't absolute.
Okay, so what was standing in his way?
The Byzantines, they still clung to some territories, and the Papal States, with their growing influence, were starting to flex their muscles a bit more.
So we have this Frankish empire layered on top of all these other cultural influences.
It's starting to feel like a historical lasagna.
It really is. But as with many empires, Charlemagne's vast realm eventually fragments.
Yeah.
What happens then?
Well, in the 10th century, we see this decline in central authority, and feudalism starts to take hold across Europe, including Italy.
Feudalism, that system of lords and vassals and knights that we often associate with the Middle Ages. It wasn't just about battles and chivalry, though, was it?
No, it was a complex social and economic system. It shaped every aspect of life. And in Italy, this fragmentation leads to a rise in local power. You have feudal lords controlling their own territories, and they're often vying for dominance. Think castles, walled cities, constantly shifting alliances.
So Italy's back to being divided. But this time, it's not about empires or kingdoms. It's about these local lords calling the shots.
Precisely. But even amidst this fragmentation, we see the stirrings of a new force, the rise of independent communes in northern and central Italy.
Communes. What were they? Like early forms of democracy?
They were not like self-governing city-states. They were driven by this growing merchant class who were tired of feudal restrictions and eager for more control over their own affairs. Think about bustling cities like Florence, Milan, Venice. These become centers of trade, innovation, and this new spirit of civic pride.
So it's a shift in power from the countryside to the cities, from lords to merchants and artisans. It's a pretty big deal.
It was a pivotal moment. These communes challenged the old feudal order and laid the foundation for the Italian Renaissance. They were innovative, entrepreneurial, and often fiercely independent. They resisted attempts by emperors and popes to control them.
It sounds like they were kind of like the rebellious teenagers of medieval Italy, forging their own path and not afraid to stand up to authority.
Exactly. And while this urban revolution is happening in the north, another dramatic shift is taking place in the south. The Normans arrive on the scene.
The Normans, weren't they those Viking descendants who conquered England? What brings them to Italy?
They're a force to be reckoned with. In the 11th century, they begin their conquest of southern Italy, ending centuries of Byzantine and Arab rule. They establish a new kingdom, bringing their own blend of military prowess, administrative skills, and cultural influences.
So they're like the ultimate power couple, combining military prowess with a knack for organization. What kind of legacy did they leave behind in southern Italy?
They brought stability to a region that had seen a lot of turmoil. They introduced new feudal structures, built impressive castles, and they even fostered this unique cultural blend, drawing on Norman, Byzantine, and Arab influences. Think about the beautiful cathedrals of Palermo. They're a testament to this Norman legacy.
Wow, it sounds like they were pretty good at keeping themselves at home wherever they went. So by the end of the 11th century, we have this fascinating mix. Communes in the north, Normans in the south, and the church still wielding its power in the middle. It's a recipe for, well, I'm not sure what.
It's a recipe for a period of incredible dynamism, and that's where we'll pick up next time as we delve into the late medieval period, a time of cultural revival, economic growth, and the ongoing struggle for power and influence on the Italian peninsula.
Last time we left off with Italy in this really fascinating but fragmented state. We've got communes flourishing in the north, Normans ruling in the south, and, as always, the church right in the thick of things.
It really was a fascinating time, and as we move into this late medieval period, things really start to heat up. We see a resurgence of trade, cities grow, and there's this renewed interest in classical learning and culture. It's all setting the stage for what we call the Renaissance.
Ah, yes, the Renaissance. The era of Da Vinci, Michelangelo, those magnificent paintings and sculptures. It's what most people think about when we think about this time period. But was it all just about art? What else was happening beneath the surface of all this beauty?
Well, it wasn't just about art, though that was a huge part of it, of course. But think of the Renaissance as this incredible burst of creative energy that touched almost every aspect of life. Art, literature, science, politics, you name it.
So it's like all of Europe is waking up after this long sleep.
Exactly, and Italy's right at the heart of this awakening.
But if we think back to where we left off, Italy was still politically divided, right? Did this change during the Renaissance?
Well, unfortunately, no. While Italy was definitely the cultural center of Europe during the Renaissance, it remained politically fragmented. We still have these powerful regional states, places like Venice, Milan, Florence, the Papal States, Naples, all competing for power and influence.
So instead of one strong, unified Italy, it's still more like a bunch of smaller players constantly trying to outmaneuver each other.
Exactly, and it's this lack of unity that made Italy vulnerable to the ambitions of stronger, more centralized European powers like France and Spain, who saw the Italian peninsula as this strategic prize.
Here we go again. Outside forces meddling in Italian affairs. It seems to be a recurring theme, doesn't it?
It does, unfortunately.
So what happens when these foreign powers set their sights on Italy?
Well, between 1494 and 1559, Italy basically becomes a battleground in what are known as the Italian Wars. French kings and Spanish monarchs are clashing for control, and the Italian states, caught in the middle, forced to choose sides and often suffering the consequences. It was a devastating period, full of conflict and instability.
It's a real shame because they are going through this amazing culturally blossoming. At the same time, they are dealing with invasions and warfare. It's almost like having this beautiful house, but it's built on a shaky foundation.
Yeah, that's a very accurate observation. And by the time we reach the Treaty of Cateau Cambrésis in 1559, the political map of Italy has been redrawn. Spain emerges as the dominant power, controlling Milan in the south, while France holds influence in the northwest.
So Italy is basically carved up like a pizza at a family dinner. What happens to those independent communes we talked about? Are they still around?
Many of them have transformed. Remember those powerful individuals, the signori who rose to prominence within the communes? Well, by this point, they've consolidated their power, and many communes have actually evolved into principalities, so they're being ruled by these families or individuals.
So it's a shift from a more collective form of government to rule by powerful families. It's a bit like the Medici family in Florence, right? They were like the ultimate power players during the Renaissance.
Exactly. The Medici are a prime example of this trend. Bankers, patrons of the arts, and ultimately rulers of Florence for generations. Their story is really intertwined with the art, politics, and intrigue of the Renaissance.
It's so fascinating how one family can have such an impact, to rise to such prominence and actually shape the course of history. But with Spain in control of much of Italy, what happens to Italian culture? Does that creative spirit of the Renaissance just fade away?
Not at all. Italian artists, writers, and scientists, they continue to make significant contributions. But the political climate has definitely shifted. Spain, being a staunchly Catholic power, is determined to counter the Protestant Reformation that is sweeping across Europe. So Italy becomes a stronghold of the Counter-Reformation. You have the Church reasserting its authority and its influence.
So there's this crackdown on religious dissent and this renewed emphasis on traditional Catholic values. What impact does this have on Italian society?
Well, it's a complex story. On the one hand, the church is sponsoring these impressive artistic projects, think the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. But on the other hand, there is also a stifling as intellectual freedom, because the church is trying to control the flow of ideas, right? Think about Galileo. His groundbreaking scientific discoveries, they're condemned because they challenge church doctrine.
Wow, really? So it's almost like a tightening of the reins. The creativity's still there, but it's being channeled in very specific directions. What about this desire for a unified Italy? Does that just disappear completely under foreign rule?
Not at all. It goes underground, it simmers beneath the surface, and it's reignited in the late 18th century by the French Revolution and Napoleon's conquests.
Napoleon. I mean, he was all over Europe causing trouble.
Yeah, but Napoleon's armies sweep through Italy and they bring with them the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity. They abolish feudalism, they introduce new legal codes, and whether they mean to or not, they plant the seeds of Italian nationalism.
So even though he's a conqueror, he inadvertently helps to awaken this desire for a unified Italy.
He does. His rule is short-lived, but the impact of his reforms and the ideals that he represents, they are profound. Italians begin to imagine themselves as one nation, not just this collection of regions.
And once this idea takes root, it must be hard to ignore, right?
Exactly.
So what happens next? What happens after Napoleon is defeated?
Well, the Congress of Vienna in 1815 tries to restore the old order. So monarchs are back on their thrones, traditional boundaries are reinstated, but the genie is out of the bottle at this point. The spirit of Italian nationalism has been awakened, and it can't be easily suppressed.
So Italy enters this new phase, the Risorgimento, the resurgence. What does this period look like? Is it all revolutions and uprisings?
It's actually this complex mix of political maneuvering, intellectual debates, secret societies, and yes, popular uprisings as well. Think of it as a slow burn, with all these different groups advocating for different visions of a unified Italy. Some want a republic, others want a constitutional monarchy. And of course, the big question is who will lead this unified Italy? It's definitely a point of contention.
Ah, so even though they're striving for unity, they can't quite agree on what this unity should look like. It almost sounds like a recipe for more internal conflict.
Exactly, and it takes decades of struggle, setbacks, and compromises to finally achieve unification. But in 1861, against all odds, it happens. Italy is proclaimed a nation-state under King Victor Emmanuel II.
Wow, what a journey. From ancient beginnings to foreign empires, city-states, and finally a unified Italy. It's a long road. What were the key ingredients, would you say, in this final push for unification?
Well, you can't talk about unification without mentioning Camillo Benso di Cavour, the brilliant prime minister of Piedmont, Sardinia. He was this master strategist and diplomat, playing the European powers against each other to achieve his goals.
So it wasn't just passion and ideals, it was also about shrewd political maneuvering on the international stage.
Absolutely. But you also need to factor in the daring military exploits of Giuseppe Garibaldi and his Redshirts. They liberate Sicily and the South, which really ignites the imaginations of Italians and paves the way for unification with Piedmont, Sardinia.
Garibaldi. Now, there's a romantic figure, right? Like the ultimate swashbuckling hero of the Risorgimento.
Oh, he was a very charismatic leader. He captured the hearts of the people. And in 1861, with Garibaldi's victories in the south and Cavour's diplomatic maneuvering in the north, a unified Italy finally becomes a reality.
Wow. After centuries of fragmentation, it's almost hard to believe they actually pulled it off.
It is a testament to the resilience and determination of the Italian people. But as we've seen throughout this deep dive into Italian history, Italy's story never really ends. Unification was just the beginning of a new chapter, full of challenges and opportunities, building a truly unified nation, addressing these regional differences, and finding their place in a changing world. Those were the tasks facing this newly born Italy. And that's where we'll end our deep dive for today.
So we've gone from ancient origins to the rise and fall of empires, from cultural brilliance to political struggles, and finally to this hard-won unification. It's incredible. What stands out to you as we wrap up here as the most important takeaway from this journey through Italian history?
For me, it's this constant tension between unity and fragmentation, this back and forth between external influences and this desire to forge a unique Italian identity. It's a reminder that history is never a simple story. It's this complex tapestry woven from countless threads.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And as we conclude our deep dive today, I'm left with this one question. How do you even begin to define a nation with such a rich and multifaceted past? It's like trying to capture the essence of a kaleidoscope. Constantly shifting, always surprising.
That's a great question, and it's one that Italians continue to grapple with today as they navigate the complexities of their historical legacy and shape their future on the world stage. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through Italian history.
Thank you for being here.